Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
How's everyone holding up?
Staying healthy so far.
That's good.
Thank you.
That's good. We'll give people a couple of minutes to get on. So,
Rabbi, just out of curiosity, did you show Moshe the thing I sent you?
I did not. We had a whole bunch
know
of
you
arguments
told me,
about
I know you missed it,
what to get dressed up as for Purim. So
See.
we didn't have that much time before bedtime because people got a little grumpy about it. So
I understand. Sure, of course.
yep, it's all good. It's a fun age. But I think maybe 2 minutes ago, Yoshi finally fell asleep. He's been screaming since about 7:15. So he only screamed for about an hour and 15 minutes. Oh my gosh. He's going through a rough patch right now. He is very much a toddler. So thank God. Thank God it's fun. Fun times. Okay, it's 8:31, so we're gonna get started. Before I share my screen, I wanted to have a little bit of a conversation. Let's see if I can. I'm gonna try that. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about first was just reviewing some of the overlooked basics of how the Jewish calendar works before we jump into our conversation about Yahrzeit. This conversation might be even more important for next week's class on bar mitzvahs, bar bat mitzvahs, but I think it's good just to have a little bit of a conversation. So we all know that the Jewish calendar has a challenge of being a lunar calendar. It's a calendar that follows the moon on the one hand, and yet it doesn't fall behind the normal Gregorian calendar that follows the sun by doing different things to try to keep up. And one of those things is what we call a leap year, like this year is. And this year we have two Adars to kind of make up the difference. And the way that our system works is on a broad scale, there is a 19-year cycle. And in the 19 years, there are 7 years that are leap years of the 19. And they're set. It's not just random. It's the same years in the 19-year cycle every single time that are the leap years. And you can intuit, you can once you know it, you could figure out a lot of things based off of that information. We are currently in the 6th year of the 19-year cycle. This is year 6. And the way it works is that there is a leap year about a little under every 3 years. So sometimes there's a 2-year difference between in the 19-year cycle. Sometimes there's a 3-year difference. So it goes 2 or 3. And the way the cycle goes, some people may have learned this in yeshiva back in the day, but there's a mnemonic. Not sure how helpful it is, but it's buch adzik, which is gimel vav chet aleph daled zayin tet, and it stands for year 3, 6, where those are separated by 3 years each. 8, that's only separated by 2 years. 11, separated by 3. 14 by 3. 17 by 3, and 19 by 2. So 2 out of the 7 have a 2-year break, and then the rest of them have a 3-year kind of break. So it's again year 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, 19. Those are the leap years in every 19-year cycle. And again, we are in year 6. We are in the second of the leap years. So The reason this is important is because you can surmise or understand different things once you know this, right? So one of the things is that over the course of time, right, there will be, and again, this is even more true for bar mitzvahs, right? You know that there are certain years in the 19-year cycle that if you're born on that year, it's going to be a leap year that will also fall out on a leap year 13 years later, right? So if let's say in year 6, let's say this year, right? So the Ekmans just had a baby boy, right? The Uri Ekmans, or to David Ekman's son, had a baby boy. Now that baby boy is born in Adar Aleph in a leap year, and it's year 6 of a 19-year cycle. 13 years later is going to be year 19 of the 19-year cycle, and year 19 is also a leap year. So it's going to be, he's born in a leap year and he will be bar mitzvahed in a leap year. Okay. So you can kind of start to already see where the questions and what the issues might be when you have a good sense of how this works. Additionally, another thing that the Jewish year does to fill in some of the gaps is something called a leap month. So we know, I think intuitively, that there are some months that have 2 days Rosh Chodesh, some months that have 1 day Rosh Chodesh, and that's because there are some months that are Malay, that are full 30 days, and there are some months that are Chaser, that only have 29 days. And many of the months, again, are fixed, right? So you have Nisan is 30 days, ER 29, Sivan 30 days, Tammuz 29, Av 30 days, Elul 29, Tishrei 30 days. Okay, that is true every single year. Okay, every single year, that's the number of days. Now, Cheshvan and Kislev are the 2 months of the year that are up for grabs. Sometimes they have 29 days, sometimes they have 30 days, and that could be right. That they're like the February 29th situation in the Jewish calendar. They don't happen all the time. Then you have, if you skip ahead, so then you have Tevet 29, Shvat 30, Adar is 29 if it's a single month. If it's a double month, then Adar Aleph is 30 and Adar Bet is 29. Okay, and again, this is set, and right, this is just how it is. So your flexibility is in the 2 days in Cheshvan and Kislev. So between those 2 days that you can flex in a year, and between the month, that extra month that's added over the course of the 19-year cycle 7 times, we basically keep our calendar, the lunar calendar and the solar calendar, in sync. Now, what becomes very interesting is the conversation about what happens, right, in various combinations of this. And we're going to do a lot more of that talk in next week's class when we deal with bar and bat mitzvahs. But what I want to do tonight is talk about Yahrzeit, and there the conversation is a little bit less, I would say, broad. But before we jump into the sources, I wanted to open up to the floor. If you were trying to think about how to create the date of a Yahrzeit, what would be your guess or your best sense of how you would create the date of the Yahrzeit? Just unmute yourselves and take a shot. How do you create a Yahrzeit?
I would observe it in the first possible month date that arrives in the calendar.
So, but I mean, I'm asking a different question though, Mel. So the question specifically is meaning is it what day are you commemorating?
The day of the person's passing.
Good.
day of that month in which the person passed.
Okay, so the day of that a person passed in, right? So that right, it's basically like an anniversary, so to speak, that whenever that day comes back, right, you're going to, right, keep that day. What other possibilities are there?
I think the first year, a lot of people keep the day that the person was buried.
That is correct. The first Yahrzeit is often different from the rest. We're not going to deal with that distinction. What I'm worried more about is trying to figure out what is the set Yahrzeit for years moving forward. That's the main thrust of tonight. We're not going to get into why that is, but you are correct. Yeah.
If you have two Adars, then you would look to see if there was a year when someone passed away and there were two Adars, would you do, if they passed away in Adar Bay?
I don't even want to deal with the two others just yet. We'll get there. So I'm just trying to figure out. So meaning you, right? So you kind of gave a second possibility, which is not how we would poskin, which is the day of burial, right? So you could say the day of death is the anniversary that we're going for. You could say the day of burial is the day anniversary that we're going for. Is there any other possibility for kind of how you would create the date, so to speak?
How about the day you hear of the death,
Okay. Also,
if you
right,
weren't there?
right. So that's actually going to be helpful to some extent, because we're going to see, right, there's a halacha about what happens when you don't know when the Yahrzeit should be, that, right, that's going to be relevant for helping us actually gameplay the actual halacha, even according to some of the more interesting views on how Adars work. But that's going to be an important point, Monica. We'll come back to it. There's one other possibility that you, and I mean, you kind of have a couple of versions of this, but is that if you take 12 months after the person dies, right, you can say that it's 12 months after the person dies, that's when the Yahrzeit is. Now, we'll see, it's not so simple, right? Meaning everyone agrees that if, let's say, someone dies on so let's say they died in the 15th of Tebet, okay, and it happens to be a leap year that year, right? So nobody thinks that you should, right, do the Yahrzeit, right, 12 months after on the 15th of Kislev, right? No one does that. The only time it becomes a question is when it happens in the month of Adar, where we get all chamished in terms of which month to do. But if it doesn't happen in Adar, we don't take into account the second Adar and just say that it's 12 months later. But we'll see. We'll have to try to flesh out exactly how this other view works. But for now, this was a good intro. We're going to now jump into the actual sources. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch says, "Kisheira yom shemes aviv o imo ba'adar." If it occurs that you are trying to keep Yahrzeit for your father or mother in the month of Adar, v'hashana me'uberes, and it is a leap year, yis'aneh ba'adar beis. You should fast in the second Adar. So again, the way that Yahrzeit used to be kept for many generations was that on a Yahrzeit, a person would fast because it was considered a time of judgment for the family. And so it was a time to be reflective and focus on it. That was how the Yahrzeit used to be commemorated. And because of Hasidic influence and other things, right? The tikkun, or the way that we the notion of saying Kaddish has always been also, but the notion of kind of saying brachot and doing other mitzvot in a positive way has become a lot more of the popular way that people keep Yahrzeits. But the Shulchan Aruch says that if you're going to keep Yahrzeit and it's a leap year, you should pick Adar Bet. Jumps in the Ramah. Again, Rav Moshe Isserlis is what was known as the Mapah, right? The tablecloth. He was the preeminent posek of the Ashkenazi community in Krakow, Poland. Again, with maybe the Marshal and he were the co-heads, but they like I've talked about before, they have a lot of debates, but the Ramah tends to be the one that most, I would say, lean on from that generation. And the Ramah says as follows: V'yesh omrim d'yisaneh barishon. This is based off of Maril, which is often a source for Ashkenazi minhag, that we should fast on the first month of Adar. Im lo shemeis b'shnas ha'ibor be'adar sheni, unless the person died in a leap year in the second month of Adar, then you should keep the Yahrzeit in the second month of Adar, right? So if the person died in Adar Bet and it's a leap year, then you should keep the Yahrzeit in Adar Bet. The aznogin leisanos b'sheni, then you should fast in the second month. V'chein haminhag lisanos b'rishon, and this is the minhag, to follow this view of the Maharil, to fast in the first month. Mihu yesh machmir leisanos b'shnehem. There are some who have a chumrah, they have a stringency that they fast on both the first and second month. So in other words, they basically keep the Yahrzeit both times. So, and again, this gets into a little bit our class from last week, where we tried to define whether or not we consider Adar Aleph to be truly the month of Adar, or is it a Hosafa? Is it an extra month that kind of is a little bit more amorphous, right? We sided mostly with the position, I think the majority position in the Rishonim is that Adar Aleph and Adar Bet are both Adar, but the preferred Adar tends to be Adar Bet. But we did see the view of the Rush last week, who said, that's not true. Only Adar Bet is Adar. Adar Aleph is nothing. Adar Aleph is a Hosafa, it's an extra month. The only time that Adar Aleph has any status is when you by mistake read the Megillah before they decided to add the leap year. Then it has a quasi status of Adar. But if not for that, if it was preordained that it's going to be Adar Aleph and not Adar Bet, it's a separate month. It's a nameless month that's not Adar. Okay, so I don't think, if we have time after we go through everything else, maybe we'll come back to the Gra. But we're going to do the Gra outside. It's a long Gra, and it will take us too long. And I want to do the Mishnah Berurahs inside, and maybe we'll come back to the parts of the Gra. But the Gra argues, and we saw this a little bit also last week, that the general view of the Vilna Gaon is that Adar Aleph and Adar Bet are both Adar. And he is of the position of this kind of this last Yesh Machmirim in the Ramah. He thinks that in fact you should fast both Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. And the question that basically arises out of this conversation is, how does that affect the way that we do Yahrzeit in 2022? Does that mean that we should follow the Gra and do your Yahrzeit twice? Does that mean we should follow the Ramah and do the Yahrzeit in the first month? Does that mean we should follow the Shulchan Aruch and do the Yahrzeit in the second month? And so we basically have every possibility in the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, and the Gra. And so you don't even have to go to obscure third shitas. These are some of the mainstays of Jewish law, all coming to opposite conclusions. And so what I want to focus on first is just the actual view of the Mishnah Berurah because I think he helps clarify some of the details. So we're going to jump to Mishnah Berurah and then maybe we'll backtrack a little bit to the ground. So actually, before we get to the Mishnah Berurah, we're going to do the Magen Avraham. So if you look here, the Magen Avraham is commenting right over here on the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch said that you should fast in the second Adar. Okay, so the Magen Avraham says as follows: Veli nira, and appears to me to the Kule Alma ha'avelim ein sarach litain lo kadesh elapamecha. Right. So the Magen Avraham says, to me, it appears that even if you wanted to argue that the fasting, right? So again, the Shulchan Aruch said you fast only in the second month. Magen Avraham says you only should say Kaddish one time. Ukiyotze b'zeh kasav, I think it's Mata Menashe, b'shem the Marshal, that mi she'eno yodeh yom shemeis bo aviv yivor lo yom echad. And this is what I was mentioning from Monica, that the Marshal says the halacha is, if let's say you don't know when your parents died, then you should establish a day that you think is near the time that they may have passed. And you basically establish that on this day, every single year, right, we are going to have a Yahrzeit. I believe Mark Ebner actually does this for many of his family members that died in the Holocaust, and he doesn't know exactly what day they died on. But if you look at the plaque, I think on the left wall when you walk into the shul, there's a date there that they estimate the Yahrzeit of the family members, and so they keep one day that is established based off of the best information that they have. And again, that is going to
Just,
yeah.
can I just, having the same kind of family history,
Yeah.
my parents were told to use the date that they knew their families arrived at Auschwitz.
Okay.
So that's the date they observed. It was the
Okay.
date they arrived at Auschwitz, even though both my parents knew their fathers survived the initial selections,
Right.
but they still observed that date.
Right. Again, so I think the argument goes that at that point they were more or less on the path to death, and you're not going to have any better estimate of the date. But
that's what they were told.
Yeah. And so again, the idea is Yivur lo yom echad, right? You do your best to clarify a day. You basically pick a day based off the information that you have, and then you move forward with that day and you keep it on a yearly basis. Al yasi gvul lomar kaddish, and this I find to be really a fascinating, just borrowing of halachic phraseology here. So you should not be, so hasagas gvul is the halachot of not opening a business near another business of the same ilk if there's not enough clientele to support both businesses, right? And the halacha is that like the established business has the right to appeal to the local courts to close down competition, again, assuming that they're actually just redoing the same thing. If they can argue that they're adding some sort of right communal need or whatever it is, or that there's enough people or whatever, there's ways around the notion of hasagas gvul. But the idea is that there's an assumption that there's going to be other people saying kaddish, whether they're chiyuvim or other people. And so even though the Shulchan Aruch said, even though there are some who say that you should fast multiple times, fast the first time, fast the second time, the Magen Avraham is pointing out when it comes to Kaddish, when it comes to right who gets the amud, so to speak, who has the rights to be able to lead. So there you should really only focus on a single day and not get wrapped up in the multi-day possibilities. Based off this Magen Avraham, we'll see the Mishnah Berurah kind of play this out. So again, the Mishnah Berurah is commenting over here towards the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. This first Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah says as follows: Shemeis aviv o imo ba'adar v'hashana mubares. If again you lose a father or mother in Adar, and this year is a leap year. Right? So the assumption here is that it wasn't a leap year, the year that the father and mother died. It was a regular year. which is more likely. Again, only 7 out of the 19 years is a leap year. Uvishanim habaim achar kach isrami shana meuberes. So das mechaber distam adar hu adar sheni, and this harkens back very much to our previous year. That for the Shulchan Aruch, the way that the Mishnah Berurah reads the Shulchan Aruch is that there is only one real month, or if all things are equal, there's only one month that we really care about of Adar, and that is the second one. That's the real Adar. Can the real Adar stand up? Says the Mishnah Berurah in the Shulchan Aruch, the real Adar is Adar Sheni, the second Adar. V'yesh omrim lahepech v'gam yesh, right, and there's some who say the opposite. V'gam yesh b'neinu tam de'ein ma'avirin al mitzvos, right, and they have their reasoning follows that you should not pass up on mitzvos. You shouldn't pass up the opportunity to commemorate your relative and to do all the things that you would normally do on a Yahrzeit. An interesting thing that I saw actually, I think I heard, I don't think I found it in text, was a whole conversation about whether or not commemorating a Yahrzeit is kind of like meaning like we said, it used to be that Yahrzeits were commemorated as fast, that people would fast on the Yahrzeit. We know that with the exception of Tanis Esther, which is a interesting fast in its own right, generally speaking, when there is ever a conflict of a Tanis, of a fast day with Shabbos, that we don't bring fasts earlier in the calendar, we push them to later in the calendar. And there's a whole discussion as to whether or not a Yahrzeit should be viewed as a fast, or is it more of an inspirational day? It's a day where we kind of celebrate the memory of people that we lost. And it's a little bit of an interesting kind of conversation about how even our emotions play into the Yahrzeit itself, right? Is it something that we're looking forward to? Not really. Is it something that we're trying to avoid? Also not really. It's a powerful moment in a year. Again, I don't have any Yahrzeits for my parents yet, but I do try to keep for my grandparents, and it's a hard moment. It's a combination of remembering kind of the people that we looked up to and who we miss desperately. At the same time, there's a comfort in the day itself of that we continue to remember and to memorialize the contribution that those people made in our lives. So it's a little bit of a packed issue or packed question, but that might also play into the actual halachic or minhag rather manifestation of a Yahrzeit. Do we view it as a fast day, or is it an inspirational day of growth and whatnot that would therefore maybe not need to be pushed off, but could be done earlier, right? Here, certainly the Mishnah Berurah says, right, the ein ma'avir and al mitzvos, we shouldn't push it away. We should jump on the opportunity. Is the logic of those who say you should do it in the first month. Okay. The second Mishnah Berurah, this one is commenting on the Ramah, but right by the section where he says there are some who actually have the practice of fasting both the first and the second month. So it says the Mishnah Berurah here. Mihu, however, Yish machmir leisanos b'shnehem. So Ayin b'Magen Avraham, as we just quoted above in Sif Katan Chaf, Shemasik the im kibel alav beneder lisanos yom shemes bo aviv o rabo echuyev lisanos b'shneim. If a person established a minhag to fast for his parents or for his teacher, then he should fast both Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. The Chain hu ha'ikr ladina, and this he thinks is right. Ikr ladina in terms of fasting is that you should do fast in both, and that is the view of the Gra, as I mentioned. Achain, however, im lo kibal love befeirush, if you didn't accept this the first time around to in fact fast on both Adar Aleph and Adar Bet, rach mitzad min haga sheminhag lisanos yom shemes bo aviv beimo, you just fasted on the actual anniversary, but you didn't necessarily say, oh, I'm going to do this every single Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. You only have to do on the rest of the years what you do the first time this occurs, where you have a leap year. Right? So based off of whatever that first time you had the leap year, that's kind of going to be what you accepted to be the reality. But if someone comes to you on that first leap year and asks you what they should do, you should tell them that they should fast at both Yahrzeit. And again, the whole conversation is a little bit antiquated because most people that I know of do not fast on Yahrzeit. Most people that I know, they do special mitzvos, they do special commemorations, they sponsor a kiddush, they have encouraged people to make extra brachot, they say kaddish, they daven from the Amid. Those are the things that people do for Yahrzeit, but they normally don't fast. There are some people though who still continue to maintain this minhag, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah is trying to highlight. Achein, im kashal lisanas b'shneim, if it's hard to fast for both, nireh shetov yoter sheyivra lo adar rishon dechein hu aminag. He says, but if it's hard for you to fast both, then after the gra, follow the Rama. Follow the Rama, who said that the Adar Rishon is the ideal time to do Yahrzeit. Achein ha'abalim ein tzrichim litain lo kaddish ela pam echad. But, and this again is from the Magen Avraham, but it's more important for us, halacha l'maaseh, because this is what most people do. In terms of kaddish, in terms of davening for the Amud, pick one day. If you don't know the day, you pick a day, you clarify a day, and you keep to that day. But you should not again encroach on the property of others when it comes to kaddish. Imes aviv biyom rishon derosh chodesh adar sheni yis'ane l'shana haba shahaisa shana pshuta biyom echad derosh chodesh adar v'lo bechaf tet. So listen to this. If your father dies on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, again, Adar generally is 29 days, but Adar Rishon is 30 days. Okay, so in a regular year, there is no 30th day of Adar. Okay, there's only 29 days of Adar. So here, the person died, your father died, Biyom Rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, which is the 30th day of Adar Rishon. So Yis'aneh L'Shana Haba'a Shahis Shana Pshuta. So the next year, because you don't have 2 leap years in a row ever, right? So the next year is a regular year. So what do? Biyom Echad de Rosh Chodesh Adar. Lo b'chaf tet bo. So here he says you should maintain which day? The first day of Rosh Chodesh of Adar Rishon. So it's basically almost a full month early, right? Because your father died on the 30th day of Adar Rishon, and you're keeping, which happened to be Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, and you're keeping Rosh Chodesh of Adar Rishon. Again, because the day doesn't exist, right? The 30th day of Adar doesn't exist. But it was Rosh Chodesh. It was Rosh Chodesh Adar. So we're going to maintain that date, even though it's not the right amount. It's a little bit of a confusing configuration. Okay. Diliolam Adar Shel Shana Pshuta Ome Tachas Adar Sheni. And again, similar to what the Mishnah Berurah said before, because really, if you're asking what's the true month of Adar in the leap year, it's Adar Sheni is the true Adar. So Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni is the equivalent of Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon. Or I guess, sorry, Rosh Chodesh of Adar in a regular year. Okay, Umisha Mace Aviv Biyom Rishon de Rosh Chodesh Kislev. So this is the 30th day of Cheshvan. Okay, so this is a year. Remember that these days don't always happen, right? If a person dies on the 30th day of Cheshvan, which is the first day of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which again is a day that only happens occasionally, doesn't happen every year. And the next year, Cheshvan, again, which is one of the 2 months in the calendar, which can be missing a day. So that day doesn't exist. So now what do you do? The Rosh Chodesh Kislev Eino Ella Yom Echad. And Rosh Chodesh Kislev in this year is also only going to be one day because Cheshvan is Chaser, because only 29 days in Cheshvan. So that means that in Kislev, there's only going to be one day of Rosh Chodesh. So in other words, that date doesn't exist. Sarach Iyon Matayis Ana. It's unclear when you should keep your Yahrzeit because the day doesn't exist, right? This is the February 29th problem. The day doesn't exist. So when do you do it? In Bechaftes L'Cheshvan, should you do it the day before, which is the 29th day of Cheshvan? Shehu Yom Echad Lifnei Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the day before Rosh Chodesh Kislev. The Hali Olam Yom Sheni Iker, right? Because the second day of Rosh Chodesh is really the main day. Shemonim L'Moados that we count for the holidays. Mishani, right? So or sorry, 1 second. Right, because the second day of Rosh Chodesh is the main day of Rosh Chodesh, and your parent died on the first day of Rosh Chodesh, so which is not the main day. So maybe we should bump you to the day before Rosh Chodesh, Chavtet Cheshvan, instead of to the second day, or in this case, the only day of Rosh Chodesh. On that next year. V'imkein hayalo pratit aviv, ptirat aviv yom achron mechodesh cheshvan. V'gam ata yikva b'yom achron mechodesh zeh, right? Because just like in the previous year, the death happened on the last day of Cheshvan, so you're also keeping the last day of Cheshvan, even though it's a different date, because again, that last day doesn't exist. So you're just doing the next best thing, which is the other last day of Cheshvan. Onema Dal Kolpanim Have Sham Rosh Chodesh Alav V'lachein Yikva Yom Yahrzeit Ata Gam Kim Rosh Chodesh. Or right, so the two possibilities are either you push the Yahrzeit to the 29th day of Cheshvan, which is a day before the Yahrzeit, or you push it to Rosh Chodesh, which is really the next day. So which way? You have to push it one way or the other. So the question is, you push it into the last day of Cheshvan, or since it was on Rosh Chodesh, you do it on Rosh Chodesh, because the day that it actually happened on is in between those two and doesn't exist on that year. Umasik Magin Abraham, and the Magin Abraham concludes the Im Shana Rishona Misas Aviv Hashana Hi Chasera, that if the month that the father died on was, if the first month after what, if the first year after was Chaser, Kamash Kasov, Vimkain Adayin Lo Hukva Ha'inyan Alav Beneder, Ikva Yahrzeit Bechaftes L'Chodesh Cheshvan. He said, right, so then you should establish it on the 29th of Cheshvan, the day earlier. As we gave the reason, again, because the main thrust of Rosh Chodesh is really the second day of Rosh Chodesh, as etc. But if let's say you have right 2 full years in a row where that day does exist, the day that he dies, and then the first Yahrzeit, imkain tzarech likva hayom b'Rosh Chodesh. Then you already had a Yahrzeit on a Rosh Chodesh. So at that point, you should continue to have your Yahrzeit on the Rosh Chodesh. Lachein af b'shanim haba'im achareihem af shehim chaserim yikva b'Rosh Chodesh. Right, so he kind of divides and conquers depending upon what the first Yahrzeit looks like. If the first Yahrzeit is on a Rosh Chodesh, you should keep them all on Rosh Chodesh. If the first Yahrzeit can be not on Rosh Chodesh because there actually is a malis that the 30th is still a day, then you can then you should just kind of establish it as the 29th of Cheshvan. And some disagree and say that you should always establish it on Rosh Chodesh, but it seems like the general consensus on this one is with the Magen Avraham that you should go back to Chavtet. It really depends on what the year looks like. Okay, so that was a lot. And the reason I did that was to try to highlight for you, right, how much confusion there could be created by our system, right? Our system has 2 days a year that, right, in the English calendar, there's a February 29th every 4 years. For us, every year there's a little bit of a question about the, right, these 2 days of the 30th potential day of Cheshvan and Kislev. So you have these 2 days that are problematic, and then you have a whole month, 7 out of 19 years, where we create this whole conversation about whether or not the second Adar is a real Adar. Are they both Adar? Is really the first Adar the first real Adar, right? And how does it all work? When the dust settles, if you have a Yahrzeit in the month of Adar, if your original Yahrzeit wasn't a leap year, then you would just keep the parallel month in a leap year, right? So if your parent died in Adar Aleph, then you would always keep Adar Aleph in a leap year. If your parent died in Adar Bet, you would always keep Adar Bet. If your parent died in a non-leap year, right, which is again the majority case because 12 out of the 19 years are not going to be leap years. So just the law of numbers is you're going to have more times than not. It's not a leap year. And then on the leap years, what should you do? So I would say it depends. If we're asking about Kaddish, about davening for the Amud, where there is a clear potential conflict of interest between you and somebody else, then you should pick one day, and that should be the first day, the first month, according to like the Rama, and you should keep your Yahrzeit in the first Adar for that year. However, when you come back to the second Adar and you come to that day again, it's not a bad thing to do something, right, to mark the day. Again, maybe it's saying Kaddish to yourself instead of davening for the Amud, because the Kaddish is not going to really interfere. The reason that the Bishop Brewer talks about Kaddish is because there's a notion that you should have one Kaddish that everyone's answering Amen to, but that doesn't seem to be our minhag. Our minhag is not really to have one person say Kaddish. In some places, actually, you'll hear people say for the last Kaddish of the davening, they'll announce Yahrzeit, and they'll just have the person whose Yahrzeit it is say Kaddish alone. It's again, different sensitivities for different people. That doesn't tend to be the minhag in our shul, so I don't think it's a problem to say Kaddish more than once if you wanted to be machmir like the Gra. But even if you wanted to just say, okay, we're going to do Kaddish in Adar Aleph like the Rama, which I think is a very normative and fine practice, I think when it comes to the Yahrzeit, again, in Adar Bet, it's not a bad thing to do an extra mitzvah or to come to shul or to do something to demarcate the day, because there is a sizable minority of poskim who think that both days are in fact the Yahrzeit. When it comes to fasting, right, as we said, it sounds like if that is a practice that you have in your family, which again, I think is pretty rare today, then it seems like the Shulchan Aruch, the Rama, following the Gra, the Gra following the Rama, following the Maril, and others felt that you should fast both, because it doesn't have no skin off anybody else's back. And that's the point. When it comes to things or commemorations that don't infringe or impinge on other people, there's a lot to be said for commemorating people more than once. Why not? It only should be more important for us if we can remember these people more. I think it's only to our benefit. But when that remembrance is going to infringe on other people, that's when it seems very clear that you should just pick the first Adar, like the Rama, and call it a day. So we'll stop here for any thoughts or questions. I hope that the introduction was helpful a little bit for trying to communicate some of the craziness of this topic. And next week, we're going to have a lot of fun dealing with different possible cases of bar and bat mitzvahs and how it all plays out. So I'll open it up for thoughts or questions. I guess that means I was perfectly clear. I'll take it as a, or I confused you so well that you don't even know what to ask. It's all good.
I mentioned to you when you picked this topic that I had missed out on exactly the same topic in another shul.
Yeah.
And the rabbi there was nice enough to give me a kind of 2-line summary of the key takeaway from it, which was that we should observe, as Ashkenazim, we observe the Yahrzeit in the first Adar. Sephardis and Israel observes the second Adar. And
So
I can't give you any other background. That was just the kind of bottom line takeaway from the shira that I missed.
Okay, so I'm fascinated by the Israel comment. I don't know where that comes from. The Sephardi comes from the Shulchan Aruch, right? The Shulchan Aruch clearly says second Adar. That's very clear. The truth though is that when you look at the Mishnah Berurah and the Gra, it seems like there's an inclination to actually try to commemorate both Adars, but right, the only time, again, the Kaddish, the way that we do Yahrzeit, it's only going to technically be in the first month, right? But it's not a bad thing, and I think personally, I think anytime we can find opportunities to push ourselves for a growth opportunity, I think it's good. I think it's positive, right? So if the memory of a grandparent or a parent or someone who you're keeping your Yahrzeit for is going to help you be a better version of you a little bit, just a little bit, doesn't have to be anything insane, but just a little bit, it's a good thing for it to be on your mind in Adar Aleph and then again another bet.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, Mel. Go ahead, please.
I'm just very quick to wrap this up, and then I'll be quiet. I promise. I'm trying to think how I was going to put. Oh, when you and I originally discussed this a few weeks ago, I'd said that years ago I was advised by various people who I thought at the time should know, and therefore I could rely on them, that I should delay my observation of parental Yahrzeit to the second Adar, and that's what I started doing after years of doing it in the first Adar. Now I'm at the point, having listened to you and also getting that bottom line 2-line summary a few weeks ago, clearly I'm going to be doing it from going forward, whatever the next leap year is in the first Adar.
Right. The one thing I would clarify before you do that is to find out the year that your parent died, whether it was the leap year or not. Because
it was not.
It was not. You're sure?
It was not. Yeah. Okay. I would have known. Right. It would have been a big issue for me from the very beginning.
Right. So then, yes, I think that's probably accurate.
So I'm very appreciative of the class that you've run on this. I really am. It's been a big help to me.
It could be that next time you do Hataras Nedarim, that you have in mind that the things that whatever you normally would do for this Yahrzeit, that you're not going to be doing it anymore in Adar Bet, that you're doing it from this point forward in Adar Aleph.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it will come up in about 2.5 weeks for me.
Yep.
So Yeshakar, thank you. And now I will be quiet, as I promised.
Okay, David, what's up?
My question is, should we be Marbin Besimcha in Adar Aleph as well as Adar Bet when there are 2 leap years? I mean, when there are 2 Adars.
So were you in our class last week? I don't remember if you were. So in the very last Shulchan Aruch, in all of Orach Chaim, right? So again, the Shulchan Aruch is broken up into four sections. Orach Chaim is about a lot of the daily practices and brachot and davening and other holidays. So the very last halacha in Orach Chaim is right here. It's Siman Taf Reish Tzadi Zayin, so 697. And the Rama basically says at the end, he says that even though we don't do Megillah and the Matanos Levyonim in Adar Aleph, nevertheless, we don't fast or do certain things, right? Fast or eulogize on the 14th of Adar Aleph. And then the Rama ends his note by saying V'tov lev mishta tamid, right? That it's good to, right? He says we don't really have to be so machmir on this whole concept of having a Suda on Purim Katan, but it's good to have a little extra enjoyment in our lives. It's good to have a little bit extra. So many point out that perhaps what he's saying here is not just about having a Ksas Suda, which is what he explicitly is talking about on the 14th of Adar Rishon, but it's the whole notion that, right, the whole Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha, right, that it's, look, to be machmir and a little extra simcha is not the end of the world, right? We should all have a little bit more happiness in our lives. So I think some point to that Rama as an indication of what you just said. I think it also depends on how you read that Mishnah that we talked about on Megillah Vav Amud Beis 6b, which said there's no difference between Adar 1 and Adar 2 except for those 2 things, the implication being that everything else is equal. So that would also, if again, not if read like the Rush, but if read like most Rishonim, most medieval commentators would argue that Adar Aleph is Adar. Adar Aleph does have status. Adar Aleph therefore should be a time where we are a little bit extra happy.
Thank you.
Can I ask a peripheral question?
Always.
What does Sephardim call Yahrzeit? Yahrzeit is Yiddish or German.
So did the what was the, give me 1 sec.
I think Zikora.
I mean, well, I don't know if they have I mean, the Shulchan Aruch calls it Yom Shemeis Aviv, right? Oh, right?
Yeah, I saw that, but it's an awkward,
Right. I don't know. I'm gonna Google it, see what happens. I need a Sephardi rabbi friend. I don't have enough Sephardi rabbi friends to ask them Sephardi questions. I don't see it. No, Google doesn't know. I mean, I'm sure it knows, but it has to do more research.
What about Zikora? What about Zikora? I think people use Zikora. That's why, like, we have Yama Zikora. I think people use that.
I mean, I think that's just like Memorial Day. I think that's like borrowed from the English holiday because it's meant to be like a memorial for all the fallen soldiers. I'm not sure. I mean, it's not a bad guess. Like, it could be. I don't know. But if you have a Sephardi friend, ask. Okie doke. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.